Los Angeles had its fair share of tough guys. But not all of them had the guts to go after Sylvester Stallone. That night, in a dimly lit bar, one man thought he could push around Hollywood's toughest underdog. Let's just say, he was in for a surprise. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe for more legendary stories from Hollywood's biggest icons. You don't want to miss what happens next. The neon Vinny's Tavern's sign flickered against the wet pavement, buzzing like a tired street lamp. It wasn't the kind of place that made headlines, but in the right circles, everyone knew it. A joint where ex-fighters, old-school gangsters, and guys with nothing to lose shared drinks and stories that never left the room. Sylvester Stallone walked in alone. No entourage, no cameras, just a man in a leather jacket looking for a quiet drink. He wasn't a regular, but he had been here before. The bartender, a gruff guy with a gray beard, gave him a nod as he slid onto a bar stool. "Whiskey?" the bartender asked. Stallone nodded. "Neat." The place was buzzing. Not packed, but lively enough. Guys in dark suits sat at corner booths, whispering deals that didn't involve contracts or movie scripts. A few rough-looking bikers occupied the back, their jackets reeking of oil and bad decisions. But there was one guy who stood out. Dominic "Dom" Ferretti. A name that carried weight in the kind of circles you didn't want to be in. He wasn't the biggest guy in the room, but he didn't have to be. His reputation did the talking. Running loan shark operations, shaking down businesses, it was all part of his trade. And tonight, he had his sights set on someone new. Stallone. At first, Dom didn't seem to notice him. He leaned against the bar, talking too loudly, laughing in a way that made people nervous. His crew, 3 guys built like linebackers, stood nearby, pretending they weren't watching the room like hawks. Then, it happened. Dom's eyes landed on Stallone, and the smirk on his face stretched wider. Well, look who it is." The bartender tensed. Conversations at nearby tables hushed slightly, just enough to hear what was coming next. Dom took a slow sip from his glass before stepping closer. "Ain't every day a movie star walks into a place like this. You slumming it tonight, Sly?" Stallone didn't react. He just swirled the whiskey in his glass, taking his time. That irritated Dom. "What, too good to say hello?" Stallone finally looked at him. Not a glare, not a challenge, just that calm, unshaken gaze that had seen plenty of fights, both on screen and off. "Just having a drink," Stallone said, his voice even. That a problem?" Dom chuckled, shaking his head. No problem at all. Just saying, big-time Hollywood guys don't usually come to spots like this unless they're looking for something. "So what is it? Trouble?" Stallone set his glass down. "You tell me." For a moment, nothing happened. Just the hum of the neon lights and the soft clinking of glasses behind the bar. Then Dom grinned. A dangerous, smug grin. "I hear you made a lot of money off those Rocky movies. Lot of guys in this town helped make that happen. Maybe even guys like me." The air in the room shifted. It wasn't just a friendly conversation anymore. This was something else. A setup. Stallone could feel it. The way Dom's guys straightened up, the way the bartender suddenly found something else to do. Dom leaned in slightly. "Thing is, Sly, respect goes both ways. And in a place like this, when a guy like me gives you a little respect," he tapped Stallone's glass, "you give a little back." Stallone glanced down at his drink. Then back up at Dom. "I don't owe you anything." The smile on Dom's face disappeared. His eyes darkened. "That so?" He gestured toward his guys. Just a flicker of movement, but it was enough. The 2 bigger ones stepped forward slightly. Not enough to make a scene, just enough to make sure Stallone knew they were there. A silent warning. A test. And Stallone? He just smirked. He grabbed his glass, took a slow sip, and let out a satisfied sigh. "You know, Dom, I've been in a lot of fights. Some I won. Some I lost. But the guys who lost to me?" He set the glass down and locked eyes with Dom. "They all had one thing in common." Dom's smirk twitched. "Yeah? What's that?" Stallone leaned in slightly. "They all thought they could win." The room was dead silent. Dom's eyes flickered, just for a second. The kind of flicker a guy like him wasn't supposed to show. A hesitation. A doubt. Then, suddenly, he let out a laugh. Loud, forced.
Oh, man. You still got that movie star mouth, huh?
He slapped Stallone's shoulder, but there was an edge to it.
A little too hard. A little too much of a statement.
Dom stepped back and downed the rest of his drink. His guys didn't move, but their eyes stayed locked on Stallone. Finally, Dom exhaled, setting the glass down. Tell you what, Sly, you finish your drink.
Enjoy your night.
But remember something, guys like me? We never forget a face. He turned, motioning for his crew. They followed him toward the exit, their boots heavy against the wooden floor. But just before Dom stepped out, he glanced back over his shoulder.
And Stallone?
He just raised his glass.
Not as a toast. As a challenge. Dom clenched his jaw. Then he was gone.
The bar slowly came back to life.
The tension faded. The bartender exhaled. Stallone? He just smirked.
This wasn't over. The city was quiet at this hour, but Stallone knew better. Quiet never meant safe. As he walked down the dimly lit sidewalk, he could still feel the weight of what had just happened. Dom's guys hadn't been ready for that. They were used to people flinching, backing down, looking for a way out. Stallone didn't do that.
He didn't run. And now, Dom had a problem.
A problem he wasn't going to ignore. Stallone's car was parked a block away, an old but well-kept muscle car that purred like a beast when he turned the key. He slid in, checking his mirrors instinctively.
Nobody on the street.
No movement in the rearview. But he still didn't trust it. Dom wasn't the type to let things go, and the night wasn't over. As he pulled out onto the main road, he noticed it.
A pair of headlights.
2 cars back. Stallone sighed, gripping the wheel a little tighter.
Of course. They didn't want to fight. Not yet.
This was a message. We're watching. He took a left at the next light, then a quick right.
The headlights followed. He smiled to himself. All right.
If they wanted to follow him, he'd make it worth their while. He pressed his foot down on the gas. The engine growled in response, and within seconds, the distance between him and the tailing car grew.
They didn't hesitate. They sped up.
Stallone weaved through the streets, taking sudden turns, testing their nerve. The car behind him was good, but not good enough. He led them onto an empty side road, one he knew had a dead end. And then, just as they committed, he slammed the brakes. The car behind him wasn't expecting it. Tires screeched. Metal groaned. The car skidded, barely stopping in time. Before they could react, Stallone was already out, standing in the middle of the street. His silhouette against the headlights made him look even bigger, his shadow stretching across the pavement. The driver hesitated.
Then the door opened.
Ricky stepped out, rubbing his temples like he had the world's worst headache. You gotta stop doing that, Sly. Stallone tilted his head. You gotta stop following me. The passenger side opened next. And out stepped Dom this time. He wasn't in a booth, sipping whiskey and acting untouchable. He was here, in the street, where there were no bodyguards, no audience.
Just him and Stallone.
Dom was older, stockier, but he carried himself like someone who had spent his whole life knowing he could buy his way out of trouble. His suit was crisp, the kind of thing that cost more than most people's rent, but it didn't quite fit the scene.
He looked out of place. He looked uncomfortable.
You could have just taken a phone call, Sly. His voice was smooth, even. A businessman, always selling something. No need for all this. Stallone crossed his arms. You don't get to follow me home and then pretend this is business. Dom sighed, rubbing his jaw. Look, I don't like problems. Stallone raised an eyebrow.
You sure about that?
Dom smirked, shaking his head. You don't get it. I run things a certain way. You might be a big deal in Hollywood, but out here?
There are rules.
Stallone took a step closer. Dom's smile faded, just a little. You don't run me, Stallone said quietly.
Dom studied him.
That's a shame. You'd be a good friend to have. Stallone didn't blink.
Yeah?
You should have thought about that before you sent your guys after me. Dom chuckled, but it wasn't real. It was the kind of laugh a man gives when he's realizing he's losing control.
Tell you what, Sly.
He slipped his hands into his pockets, rolling his shoulders like this was all casual.
I'll let this slide. Just this once.
Stallone stared at him. You don't let me do anything.
Dom's jaw tightened.
For a long moment, the two men just stood there, the street lamp casting long shadows between them. Finally, Dom exhaled.
All right, then.
He gave a small nod to Ricky. Ricky got back in the car without another word. Dom hesitated for just a second longer, his eyes narrowing.
Then he followed.
The car reversed, turned, and disappeared into the night. Stallone stood there, unmoving. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, Stallone wasn't in a hurry. He had his usual routine: early workout, coffee, a quiet moment to himself before the world caught up.
But today? Today, he expected something.
Dom wasn't the type to just walk away. And Stallone wasn't the type to wait. By noon, he was back in the same neighborhood as the bar. He parked a block away, taking a slow walk down the street. People recognized him, nodding, giving him space. He appreciated that.
He wasn't here for attention.
He was here for answers. The bar was closed, at least officially. But the door wasn't locked.
Stallone pushed it open.
Inside, a handful of Dom's guys were sitting around, sipping coffee, pretending not to notice him. They noticed. At the back, Ricky was behind the bar, wiping down a glass. He barely reacted.
Man, you really don't take hints.
Stallone leaned on the counter. Where's Dom? Ricky sighed, setting the glass down.
Why? You didn't get enough last night?
Stallone didn't answer. Ricky studied him for a second, then shook his head. Dom ain't here.
Then you'll do.
Ricky smirked, but there was something in his eyes, hesitation.
He wasn't dumb.
He knew where this was headed. Look, Sly. You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. Dom, he don't like when people don't play by the rules.
His rules? The rules.
Stallone nodded slowly. That's the problem, Ricky. I don't follow rules made by guys like Dom. Ricky exhaled, shaking his head. You don't get it. You should have just let it go.
Yeah?
Stallone's voice stayed calm. Then tell me why Dom hasn't let it go. Ricky didn't answer. Because they both knew the truth. Dom wasn't backing down. And neither was Stallone. Before Ricky could say anything else, the front door opened. Stallone didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Dom. He walked in like he owned the place, like last night never happened.
Same suit.
Same confidence. But something was different. He wasn't smiling this time.
You just can't help yourself, can you?
Stallone turned to face him. Seems like we got unfinished business. Dom sighed, rubbing his temples like he was dealing with a headache. Sly, you're making a mistake. No, you did. Dom's eyes darkened. For a moment, the bar went completely silent. Then Dom exhaled, shaking his head.
Oh, all right.
He snapped his fingers. Two of his guys moved. Not fast. Not aggressively.
But enough. Enough to make a statement.
Stallone didn't move.
Didn't flinch.
He just looked at Dom and smiled. That's your move? Dom hesitated. And in that hesitation, Stallone stepped forward. Just one step. But it was enough.
Enough for Dom's guys to stop.
Enough for Ricky to shift, like he wasn't sure if he wanted to be here anymore. Enough for Dom to realize he didn't have control over this moment. Stallone tilted his head. If you're gonna do something, do it. Dom clenched his jaw. He wanted to.
But he wouldn't. He couldn't.
Because Stallone wasn't like the others.
And now?
Now everyone in the room knew it.
Dom exhaled.
You're a real pain in the ass, Sly.
Stallone smirked.
Yeah, I get that a lot. Dom didn't say anything. Didn't give any more orders. He just stood there. And then, finally, he turned. Walked out. His guys followed. Ricky let out a breath, shaking his head. You just made an enemy, man. Stallone shrugged. What else is new? And with that, he walked out too. Dom wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The sun had barely set when Stallone got the call. Unknown number. No voicemail. He let it ring. It rang again. And again. On the fourth call, he picked up. Silence. Then.
You like making things difficult, huh? Stallone smirked. You like talking on the phone? Dom chuckled.
Look, Sly. I'll give you credit. You got nerve. But let me tell you something, this ain't a movie.
This is real life.
Stallone leaned back in his chair, staring out the window.
You think I don't know that? Dom exhaled.
I think you forgot how things work. You don't walk into my place and disrespect me. And you sure as hell don't walk out without consequences.
Stallone stayed quiet. Dom continued. You should have taken the easy way out, man. But now?
Now, I gotta remind people who runs things around here.
That right?
That's right. Stallone nodded to himself. Then why are you calling me?
Silence.
Dom wasn't expecting that.
Stallone smirked.
If you had all the power, you wouldn't need this call. You'd have handled it already.
Dom's voice dropped.
Maybe I just wanted to be nice. No, you wanted to make sure I was scared.
Another pause. Then Dom chuckled.
But it wasn't the confident kind. All right, Sly, have it your way. The line went dead. Stallone put his phone down. He knew what came next. That night, he went about his business as usual.
Dinner. Workout. A late-night drive through the city.
But when he pulled up to his house, he saw it.
A car. Black.
Tinted windows.
Parked just a little too close.
Not moving.
Watching. Stallone sighed, gripping the wheel.
Then, instead of going inside,
he got out.
Walked straight toward the car. The driver noticed.
A flicker of movement. A hesitation.
Then, the window rolled down. Inside, one of Dom's guys.
Not Dom himself. Not yet.
Stallone rested his hands on the roof of the car, leaned in slightly.
You lost? The guy smirked.
Just enjoying the view.
Yeah? Yeah.
Stallone nodded. You tell Dom he can do better than this.
The guy's smirk twitched. You sure about that? Stallone straightened up. Oh, real sure.
For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, the guy exhaled, shook his head, and put the car in drive.
Didn't speed off. Didn't make a scene.
Just rolled away. Stallone watched the taillights disappear. Then, finally, he went inside. Dom was testing him. Seeing if he'd back down.
He wouldn't.
Dom would have to do better than that. The next night, Stallone went back to the bar.
Not to talk. Not to negotiate. To finish this.
Inside, things were different.
Tension in the air. Fewer people. Fewer voices.
They were waiting for him. Dom was in the back. This time, he wasn't standing. He was sitting, relaxed, like he had all the time in the world. Two of his guys stood nearby. Not moving.
Not speaking.
Dom looked up as Stallone walked in.
Smirked. Man, you really don't quit. Stallone pulled up a chair.
Sat across from him. I like to see things through. Dom chuckled, shaking his head. Then, he leaned forward. So what's your move, Sly? You think you can just keep walking in here and nothing's gonna happen? Stallone met his eyes. I think you already know how this ends. Dom studied him. For a moment, neither of them spoke.
Then, Dom sighed.
Sat back. His smirk faded. You know, Sly, there was a time I might have liked you. Stallone tilted his head.
Yeah?
Yeah, but now? Now you're just a problem. And what do you do with problems? Dom exhaled through his nose.
I fix 'em.
Oh, try it. Dom's fingers tapped against the table. The two guys behind him shifted slightly. But Stallone didn't move. Didn't blink.
Didn't look away. And Dom? Dom saw it.
Saw what everyone else had seen. Stallone wasn't afraid. Not of him. Not of anything. And that's when Dom realized. He had already lost. He just didn't want to admit it yet. Dom exhaled, leaning back in his chair. He ran a hand over his jaw, studying Stallone like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. The bar was silent. His guys were waiting. Watching. Waiting for Dom to make a move.
But Dom?
He wasn't so sure anymore. You got some nerve, Sly. I'll give you that. Stallone didn't respond. Didn't need to. Dom let out a slow chuckle, shaking his head. You know what your problem is? He muttered.
Or you think you're still in control?
Stallone finally leaned forward. I know I am. For a second, Dom didn't say anything.
Then,
A snap of his fingers. One of his guys stepped forward.
not fast.
Not aggressive. Just a warning.
A message.
Stallone didn't move. Didn't even blink. He just glanced at the guy, then back at Dom and smiled.
This the best you got?
The guy hesitated.
Dom saw it.
He clenched his jaw, drumming his fingers against the table. He didn't want this to go further.
Not here. Not now.
But he also couldn't just walk away. Not in front of his guys. Not without losing face. So he did something unexpected. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. You really want to do this, Sly? Already doing it.
Dom studied him.
Then sighed, shaking his head. You're a real pain in the ass, you know that?
Stallone smirked.
So I've been told.
Another pause. Then,
Dom snapped his fingers again. This time, his guy stepped back. The tension didn't leave the room. But the moment had passed. Dom sat back, rubbing his temple.
then, finally, he laughed. A short, humorless chuckle.
All right, Sly, you win. Stallone raised an eyebrow.
That easy?
Dom's smirk returned.
Ain't easy. Just smart.
He nodded toward the door. Get out of here before I change my mind.
Stallone stayed still for a moment. Then he stood up, turned, and walked out.
No words.
No threats.
No looking back. Just a quiet, final message. This was over.
And Dom knew it.